there. And so it was very fun to kind of have.
All right, so we are just in the vamp portion of this evening. We're just waiting to hear, and we're live. All right, hello everyone. Lindsay Price here, co-creator of the Drama Teacher Academy. Welcome to our PLC tonight, our Drama Teacher Academy family, and our theater folk family. We've opened the doors for everyone to come and enjoy this conversation between our amazing panelists and to ask questions if you have them. That's what the chat's for. So let's get started on this topic of navigating personal challenges. And I'd like to introduce our folks who are going to have a conversation about this very interesting topic that I know everyone is dealing with in some fashion. We have the amazing Lee Marshall. Hello, Lee.
Hello.
And the equally amazing Claire Broom. Welcome, Claire.
Hello.
And now we have our host with the most. I turn this over to you, Matt Webster. Where do we start with navigating personal challenges?
Well, I think the best place to start would be defining personal challenges, because there's a lot of different things that can be considered personal challenges. And a lot of those different challenges can certainly make their way into the classroom, because classrooms are taught by teachers and teachers are people, and things happen to people sometimes. So, Claire, I'm going to start with you. What are some of the things that you would identify as personal challenges that might infiltrate their way into the classroom, infiltrate their way into a teacher's lives? Not necessarily things that may have happened to us personally, but we are teachers, we work with teachers, and I know I've seen a lot of different kinds of challenges that people have had to deal with. What are some that pop to mind for you?
Well, to begin with, anything that's a personal challenge would be anything that's happening in your life. So sometimes they can be wonderful things like a wedding or those things that take up time and energy to be able to deal with. And then other personal challenges could be anything from a family member being sick, or you becoming sick, or a death in the family. A separation, a divorce. There's a ton of things that can happen to people because we're grown-ups and life happens. And so anything that's really kind of outside of school, that's what I would say is a personal challenge.
Right. And it's an interesting point that you bring up, that there are very positive things that can be personal challenges. It's the idea of how much effort and energy and time it takes from you, and what it does to you mentally and physically. And even if they are positive things, some of those things can really be challenging. Lee, how about you? What are some things to come to mind when you think about personal challenges that teachers might face in this day and age?
Mondays.
Straight up. There we go.
Yeah. Mondays. Tuesdays also.
Mm-hmm.
Wednesdays, Thursdays. And then that horrible 5-day week, the 5-day weeks. It's just the 5-day weeks. No, I think too, for me, sometimes exactly what Claire said, echo all of that, the things that are going on in your own life outside the classroom, but also like this week is our district week, and I host our district festival for thespians, or it's at another school, but I'm kind of the grand poobah of getting all the stuff ready. So that, or show week or tech week kind of thing, those also, because they are outside the classroom, but also in our hearts, or on our shoulders a lot of times. So I think those two, just sometimes the time of year is the season that you're in personally, but also the season that you're in also with, is it districts? Is it your show? Is it something else that happens at the school that you're in charge of that is outside of your, I say 9 to 5. No, I'm sorry, 7 to 3 teaching classes job.
And a lot of those things are compounded by the fact that we are, as you were saying, Lee, the grand poobah oftentimes, that there are responsibilities that we have to fulfill that demand an equal amount of time, sometimes a greater amount of time, and there's only so many hours in the day. And that's really where the anxiety starts to build up. That's really where the panic starts to build up. So let's talk for a second about some of the responsibilities and where those responsibilities lie. Lee, I'm going to stay with you. What are some of the things that we as teachers are responsible for? And how much of those responsibilities are really the kinds of things where we're the only ones who can do it? Because there are some of those. Now, we're going to talk about things that we might be able to pass off to other people, but what are some of those responsibilities that really absolutely fall into our lap and we can't get out of them?
Yeah, and I think as theater teachers, there are those other things that happen. For me, it's the thespian club or the drama club that also I'm running. And so those are sometimes students that aren't in my classes. And so trying to then for them to have a theater experience and having to teach them outside of class, kind of the stuff. Sometimes I just want to go, if you were in theater, you would know this already, kind of thing. So I think the clubs that we run, there's also, I mean, I think at every school there are other things placed on the teacher that are, our school, I swear it's a drill a week. Like, you've got to do this drill and then you've got to do the paper. I tell my kids all the time, if they're like, oh, I almost tripped. I was like, do not trip in here because I will have to do paperwork. Like whatever, I have to do so much paperwork anyway, just to buy 240 rubber duckies that I had to buy last week. Don't ask any questions, but Duckcember is coming. But there's so much paperwork to do anything in or outside of the classroom. We just did this incredible improv musical opportunity that was great. It was a professional improv musical team that came, but just the paperwork to get people to that thing was again outside of my regular teaching thing. And then there's just all of the things that every year our county or our state says, hey, wouldn't it be great for kids to do this career training? Well, gosh, let's just let every teacher do it, one day out of the month. But then there's just all these other things that are put on our plate. And I get it. We are the ones with the kids in front of us, but it's also one more thing for you to either take a training on and then do, or do with no training, which is not great either.
Yeah. It's such a good point, Lee. We have the daily classroom activities. We have our students that we're in charge of. We have whatever assignments from admin. But there is an extra layer that most theater teachers have, which is at some level, you have some kind of responsibility for the auditorium or parts of the auditorium. So any kind of special project that comes through, any kind of thing that requires overseeing or setup or anything, those responsibilities are yours. And I remember when I was a high school teacher, I was very reticent to let anyone else go into that space, because if I had a show coming up and I had a set on stage, I didn't want that stuff torn apart. If I had the light board set up in a certain way or the soundboard set up a certain way, I didn't want people coming in and messing with that. So those are extra responsibilities I put on top of it, that if I wasn't around, if I had other things I had to deal with, that's just another layer that I had to contend with when I had to figure out how to deal with whatever crisis was at hand. Claire, how about you? What are some of the responsibilities that add some of that pressure and add to some of the stress of making it difficult to deal with these things?
Well, when it comes to you in your classroom, sometimes it's even just the atmosphere of the school that you're in and how staff morale is at the time. Sometimes you're thinking about other people that you're working with or your department, or if you have taken on any other roles in the school. So for example, I'm a department head, so I run music, dance, drama, visual arts, and French. So, because of course that makes sense. So there's a lot that kind of comes with that. And then there's the personal management of people within that as well. If you think about really what our core is when it comes to being teachers, it's creating that safe, I'm going to use the word safe space, but what I mean is a safer space. We can't make sure that every space is safe. But what we need to do is make our spaces as comfortable and warm and fuzzy as they possibly can for our students. And often there's a lot of things that get in the way of that. So sometimes it is administration has their mandates, or the board has a mandate, or there's things that you have to do with your students within the classroom that maybe either you didn't create, or they're passed down that you have to present because it's information that the kids need to know. So I think in a lot of ways, anytime you don't have control over what you are doing in your classroom, those are outside forces that you just kind of have to figure out how to make it work.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, when that falls strictly on our shoulders, we're typically the only theater teacher, drama teacher in our school. There is not a colleague who knows what you're doing, who knows how this works, that you can typically turn around and say, hey, I'm going to need to step back a little bit. Can you pick it up? And, give and take as that goes. It's oftentimes patently unfair. Most other subjects have multiple teachers across the school, and they can share that load. They can share that burden. And it's not as easy for us. It's not impossible, but it's not as easy for us. So we're talking in this PLC about navigating personal crisis. So let's talk about the steps we would need to take to start that process. If we find ourselves faced with a personal crisis that begins, whether it's a family emergency, whether it's a medical emergency, but it's something, let's start with something unexpected. What is the first step that we should take in starting to get control of it and being able to handle it as we move forward? Claire, I'm going to stay with you. What's the first step in this process of navigating these issues when they come up? Practically speaking, what should we do to try to keep our heads clear and move forward?
It sounds simple, but the first thing is identify the problem, and then also identify what kind of impact this is going to have on you for the next little while. And sometimes when something's first starting, it's really hard to know that. But it's something like, is this something that I can handle from school, or is this something that I need to leave the classroom to deal with? That's, I think, one of the first things that you need to figure out. After that, once the situation kind of starts to reveal itself, I think the next thing that you need to do is figure out, how much time do I need to spend on this? And that sounds like a really weird thing. But I think often we can worry about things and we can overthink things, and it really invades us, and it invades our space, it invades our classrooms. And so I think coming up sometimes with, what is the time frame that I need to be able to focus on what I need to do for this situation, is kind of your next steps. So I think in some ways, if you're able to create lists, if you're able to figure out, like, right now in this moment, what are my next 3 steps? Because you may not be able to plan everything, but what's just the thing that I need to do right now to get through whatever it is that's going on. I think also, if you can have emergency backup plans for your classes pre-created before something like this happens, it helps, because you might have to say, hey, I have to drop everything. Can you please do this one-off lesson with the supply teacher or whoever's coming in for you? So if you have anything to do before the event happens, I would suggest putting together the emergency lesson plans.
The idea of identifying and clarifying what it is you're dealing with is really important, because oftentimes these things hit us and our brain just goes haywire, and rightfully so. Some of these things are very scary, and they're unexpected. And because of that, it's, your brain goes into panic mode, and you start thinking about all the things that need to happen or can't happen or you need to do today. And the ability to kind of slow down, rationalize. And I love the idea of making lists, Claire, because that once you start to put it on paper, it becomes tangible, and it's not just, spaghetti against the wall. You can start to lay out some straight critical thinking on, okay, what does this mean? What do I need? What are the steps I will take? And having that moment, taking the time to kind of feel that through and figure out how you can begin to address and attack whatever problem is facing you, is a huge first step. Because without that, you start running into it, crazily, and it's hard to ever get in front of it. It's hard to ever feel like you are successfully managing whatever it is you're trying to manage. Lee, do you have thoughts on this about how you start to face something that comes in like this when a personal problem starts to come in?
Yes, and I actually faced this last year. I had to take 9 weeks off to deal with a family situation, and I think one of the best things to do is to have. And I know not everybody has great admin, but hopefully there's one. Hopefully there's one in your. I have five, and so I have a couple that are really great. More than a couple, really. So talk to either other teachers around you, other people, and about the situation. Because in my mind, I was, when I get really stressed, I get this tunnel vision where I cannot see the forest. I see a tree. And, my tree is usually, I have to go to work. I have to do this one act. I mean, there's nobody else in the world that can do this job kind of thing. I just get this incredible tunnel vision. And so having other people who can speak into that and really say, hey, like Claire said, like, is this something you can work through? Or do you not need to be working, just the distance wise, I needed to be someplace else kind of thing. Is this something, that is workable on a day-to-day basis? Or is this something that you're going to need to have a bigger chunk of time off? And so, and somebody really said, we juggle a lot of things, a lot of balls, and some of them, if they drop, they bounce. And some of them, if they drop, they break. Don't drop the breakable ones. And your classroom can bounce. Your classroom can bounce to somebody else. You can toss that ball to somebody else if you need to. Again, like Claire said, if you have supplants, I have Canvas at my school. And so it was very easy to have all of my modules for that first 9 weeks. Most of them were Drama Teacher Academy modules that were on Canvas so that a teacher could teach through, again, differently than I would teach, but that's a bouncing ball. That was a bouncing ball. And there were other balls that I needed to, keep my hands on because they would break if they had dropped. So really, and that was something, again, somebody said that to me. That was not something I came up with on my own. That was a really good friend, a teacher, who said, I think you really need to consider this. And so I think really surround yourself and talk to other people, talk to professionals, talk to your admin, talk to a counselor, somebody that can really help you if you tunnel vision like me, so that you can see the bigger picture, and that they can survive without a one act in the fall.
Right.
They really can.
Yeah. The bouncing and the breaking is a really, really great way to define that, because this idea that you have to prioritize, and there are things that absolutely can and will go on without you and your immediate connection to it. But there are other things that might not be able to, or there are things that have to do with family. And at some point, you have to make the choice between family and school and blah, blah, and be realistic about it, and be absolutely as, look at the reality of what is happening, look at the importance of what is happening, and think about, as Lee so nicely put, the things that'll bounce. The school's not going anywhere. The kids aren't going anywhere. But if there's someone in crisis in your family, or if you're in crisis, that needs to be addressed, because without you and without your input, there's going to be more dire issues than the kids not having a one act. And as much as that breaks our heart, again, the sun will come up the next day. There will be other opportunities. And quite frankly, the kids will most likely understand and be supportive because they're there for you. But Lee, you bring up a very good point that I want to talk about next. And I'll come back to Claire for this. Lee talked a lot about communication. And I think that's another really important step of navigating this, that we need to communicate to our admin, to students, to whoever, to our families, what the crisis is that we're facing and what steps you're going to need to take or try to take to alleviate the immediate problem at hand. What are your thoughts on that, Claire? How do we open good channels of communication, and how do we get the most out of them?
I'm going to steal an idea from Jay Shetty. I'm making an assumption that maybe he found it from somebody else too, but one of the things that he talks about is find somebody who can give you like real advice. Sometimes with what you're going through, it's great to have the friend to be like, oh, poor you and all of that stuff. But really, if you can find somebody who's gone through what you're going through, they're going to have way better advice about how to deal with the situation. So I think that's something to keep in mind when you're thinking about communication. I think you also have to think about who are your supports and who are your allies. Leah is so lucky to have 5 administrators who are on her side and awesome, they sound like. And maybe for you, it may be one administrator, it may not be all of them. And so deciding who you need to speak to, I think, is also something that you have to think about. And depending on what you're going through. I think with students, one of the things that you have to be aware of is, and I'm assuming everybody knows this, but just in case to put it out there, is you don't know if what you're going through is their button as well. Like you don't know if they're going through that as well. So being really aware that if you're, if you have to take time off, or if there's something that you're going through, reminding yourself that you're the adult in the space and what you share and what you don't share. Just on a side note, and I'm not plugging this show in any possible way, but there's this great cartoon called The Great North. And one of the things that happens is that this drama teacher is supposed to be like doing this musical, but she ends up getting jury duty. And so she can't do the show. And so what they end up doing is bringing in the guidance counselor to do this. So comedy ensues where one of the kids is getting frustrated because the guidance counselor doesn't know all the terminology, but she's there and she's trying, right? And so sometimes I think it's also trying to find who's willing to jump in, right? Because maybe we are the only drama teacher, but maybe there's somebody who loved drama in high school and wants to pick up one of the balls for you. And that might be another way that you can get through the situation, is just being able to say like, hey, I can't continue with this, but Mr. or Mrs. or however they want to be addressed is going to take over. I'm so excited that you get to work with this person, and it's going to be a great learning experience for all of you. So just finding who can be your allies, who can pick up things for you.
Yeah. Well, you bring up a great point, Claire, that I want to dig a little deeper on. Both of you have talked about, finding the admin, having the ally. Again, we can break these into 2 categories of kind of the good personal crisis of like a pregnancy or a wedding, or something that's a life positive, but again is going to take time and effort and ability away from what you're doing, or you need to carve space out of that, and you don't want to shortchange your job or your kids. And then there's also crises. There's also medical crisis or family crisis or health crisis or financial crisis that could happen. There are things that happen. And sometimes, Claire, you kind of alluded to this as well. Some of these crises are not necessarily, we say it's personal, but there are crises that go across societal boundaries as well. COVID and the pandemic was a crisis for everyone concerned, and people had to deal with it in different ways, but we were all facing the same kind of crisis that we're trying to work over. So my question then is, if we're facing one of these personal crises and we know we need to communicate, how do we know who to communicate to? Who do we tell? Who do we not tell because it's not appropriate, or any other number of reasons? Lee, I'm going to come back to you on this one. What is your thinking on this? How do we figure out who to communicate with? Who's on that list?
Yeah, and I think it's a really personal question. And it just depends on, there's a lot of nuance to it. I can't give you if it's this, then these, then this, and then I do know that for me, who is privy to your story? I think that's kind of it. And for me, I know at one point I was going to send out this whole detailed thing to everybody on my staff. And I had a teacher that I kind of ran it by, and she goes, not everybody gets your story. Like, if you want to send that to a couple of people, you can, but they don't all need to know. They don't all need to know what's happening. And I just thought that was really great advice. Not everybody on staff needs to know. And though I contacted my thespian officers because those are the kids that have worked with me for 3 or 4 years. And they got the most of the story that the students got. They probably got the most of it, my thespian officers. And I said to them, how you react is going to be how the club will react. Now y'all can do thespian things, but how when we have our first thespian meeting and I tell them that I'm not going to be there for the first 9 weeks, your faces on that Zoom is going to be, how everybody's going to take it. And they just did a great job and they ran with it. And I tell you, that leadership that I had last year was so strong. And I think it's because they had to do the first 9 weeks on their own, really. And they did an incredible job. But again, who are the people that get the whole story and who gets the highlight version and who gets just Miss Marshall is not here this 9 weeks.
Right.
And
I've heard it described as not everyone deserves your story. And as harsh as that may sound, thinking in terms of self-protection and also protecting the people that you're speaking to. Some of those kids don't need that. As Claire was saying, it might be actually more detrimental, more triggering for them to know details about things that really they have no control over anyway. And so it's just going to cause undue stress. So the idea of, you just tell everybody everything and that's what's best is not necessarily the case. There is, as you say, Lee, some nuance and there's some thinking behind it and strategic thinking to a certain extent as well. Claire, on that same idea, how do we go about strategically figuring out who are the people we bring into our story, whether for asking for help or support or anything else?
I think you also have to think about what it is that you need from them. And maybe that's a starting place to decide who you need to talk to and what about. If you have an administrator and you need to go on a leave, or if you are going through something personal and you have to step back from some of the work, you don't have to be detailed in why. You can, say at this point, as much as I love to do whatever it is, it's not something that I'm able to do with my job right now, or maybe it is, I do need to take a leave right now. The other thing is what you hope from somebody, you can make that clear to them and say, listen, I would like to tell you what's going on, but my hope is that you're going to be able to whatever it is for me. So sometimes having that in mind as well, because the first thing that people are going to want to do is help you. And so if you can think about it in advance and say, here's what I need from you, here's what's going on, and this is why. Or as much of the story or as little of the story as Leo was mentioning, that's perfect too. So I think being very careful about who you speak with and who you get advice from is really important too. Again, if you can find somebody who's gone through it, sometimes that really does help. So I know a number of teachers have supported each other in my school board to figure out how to take leaves and what the process is, because even starting that, you have no idea. Or even thinking about like, how do I manage this? Or, who's the best lawyer to talk to, or what, any of those things. And that's how you make connections, or even who's the best therapist for this. That might also be another way to find some support for you.
How do we go about sharing and including some of these things with our students, because we're spending time with them, and there are going to be times with some of these really difficult crises where it's going to be hard to keep it together in front of your class, that in between classes you get a text message that something bad has happened, or some information has come in that you weren't expecting, and again, you're a person and you are feeling real feelings, and those real feelings are terrifying at the time or sad at the time or whatever. How do we go about including our students, or at least informing our students, without being peers? As you said, Claire, we're the adult in the room and we have to handle this as the adult. We're not going to have friend time with a bunch of middle school or high school kids. That's completely inappropriate in these circumstances, but we still need to get through the day. And sitting at the desk with tears rolling down your eyes in fear is bad for them. It will spook the herd. There's no doubt about that. So, Claire, do you have any thoughts on how we share and inform without drawing in our students?
I think the first thing is when you understand what the crisis is or what the issue is, you have to decide, do I have to respond to something right away? So for example, if you're going through a separation or a divorce and you've got a lawyer contacting you, or you have your ex trying to contact you during the school day, figure out a way of turning off those notifications, because realistically, you don't need to read that in your classroom, and it is something that they can wait to get a response for. So if you can, for some of those situations, I would suggest like don't even have it be in your space. For emergencies, that's a bit of a different situation, because if it's an emergency, you're not expecting it. You don't know what's going on. It's not something that you didn't expect. I think as soon as you get that message, the sooner you can get out of the classroom, that might help you. So if you have a friend who's teaching across the hall or next door, you might have to say, hey, I have to step out. Can you just like listen to my class? And then it might be really quickly like, hey, I have to step out for a few minutes. Can you all X, Y, and Z? So talk amongst yourselves for a minute while I sort this out. So it may not be necessary that you have to explain what's going on. Sometimes that can come out later. I had to go on a medical leave last December, and I got pulled off. I went back on the next day just to explain to my students, I'm like, I'm really sorry, I'm not going to be here for this time. This is my expectations of you. I'm going to be okay. If you need to reach out to me for any questions, that's great. But if it's like, hey, how's it going? I'm not going to necessarily write back to you. And just understand that I'm here to support you as a teacher. And I know that you'll be wonderful, but I don't think you always have to get into all of the details about everything with everyone.
Right. Right. And it's kind of literally as a need to know kind of thing.
Yeah.
And discretion is the better part of valor. What do they need to know to get through this immediate thing so everyone can kind of, stay on the same page and move forward. Lee, what are your thoughts on this? What are your thoughts on how do we share? What do we share? How do we communicate without sucking them in?
Yeah, I think too, I'm always really honest with my kids about if I have an Apple Watch, but I don't have any notifications on it except for one or two, if my husband needs to get in touch with me or my kids. And I'll say so I'm not getting other notifications all day at all. And I'll tell them, I expect the way that I'm going to use my phone in class is how I expect you to use your phone. And I will only use it if there's an emergency. And so if there's an emergency and you have to call your mom or your grandmother, if something is happening, it's always their grandmother. Something's happening with your grandmother, step outside the classroom and talk to whoever you need to talk to, or fire a text off to them. Step outside. Sometimes just that getting up and going outside, they're like, oh, I'll text them later. Like that's how you can judge whether it's an emergency or not. But that, very rarely I have kids who are like, hey, I have to talk to my mom about something. Okay, step outside and do it. Great. Just like you would in a theater. If there was an emergency in a theater, I would step outside and take a phone call, but I would not sit in the middle of the theater and talk on my phone. And so again, I try, my classroom, this is a show every day. And so again, sometimes you do have to take a phone call. If there's a doctor calling and you're waiting for something and you have rehearsal till 5, you've got to take it, hey, I've got a phone call from a doctor. I've been waiting for this call. I'm going to step out here, I have a little door I can open, but I can still see into my classroom. Again, like Claire said, talk amongst yourselves. Everybody take 5 and kind of thing. And so I think just having that expectation, even from the beginning of the year, we are all going to use our phone in a responsible manner for emergencies only, myself included.
Absolutely. And what I have found is when you have a honest, short, simple conversation with students, let them know what's going on, by and large, they roll with it. By and large, they'll like, okay, that's what this is. I'm reminded that I had a medical condition that actually got repaired a couple years ago, but it was something called supraventricular tachycardia. And that means that at any moment, my heart could race at up to 200 beats per minute. And it would be a little, it happened for years, so it wasn't scary, but it was difficult in the moment. And when it would happen in front of a group of students, I'd have to sit down for a second because I'd go a little pale and say, here's the thing that's happening. I'm going to be able to deal with it, but it's going to be weird for a little bit. So I just need you guys not to be in any position to make me any more worked up than I need to be. And they're like, cool, we got it. And everybody played nicely. So every time that there has been moments, there's times when I've come to school with a cold or flu and feeling really bad. And like at the beginning of the day, at the beginning of each class, I say, I don't feel good. And we can have a good day or we can have a bad day. And all I need from you guys today is to get through today. Can we all do that? And they're like, got it. Yep, good. And next day it's chaos as usual, and that's great. But for the day and being able to talk to them, they rise to the occasion as they typically do, and will give you the support that you need, which is really nice. But again, that's contingent on good, clear communication, and everybody knows the expectations of what we're going to do to get through this day. So those things are really important to help navigate and get through those, whether immediate crises or crises of things that it's like, hey, I've got a thing that's coming up, things are difficult or whatever, and it's going to be rough, and I can appreciate your guys' help. And like I said, by and large, they go at that. Lee, that's something that looks like one of the
Yeah, I was also going to say I've really gotten better now in now that I've taught for almost a decade theater, in knowing like my week, knowing the weeks that are going to be hard, and also knowing your class. Like I have a theater one class that they are not going to roll with that. If I tell them I have a cold, they are going to try and kill me. It's just, that's how it's going to go. Now, the rest of my classes are going to be like, oh, you poor thing. How can we help you? Let me rub your back. I mean, it's going to be great. But then I'm going to have that one that wants to kill me. Like, this is the time. We've been waiting for this. So I think knowing your classes and knowing also your season, like I know that today I actually told Theater 3, we're watching A Doll's House. They've read it. They've done scenes from it. We've done all this. And I'm like, hey, this week we're going to watch a really good version of it because I just need one chill class a day. And guess what? You get to be it. And so they're Theater 3. They've been with me for 3 years. So knowing what your class is, like Theater 1, I've got to keep that one class pretty busy. I've got to give them something to do. Other classes, I can give them a chill kind of thing. And so knowing that and knowing what modules to plan for that time, or just, okay, this is a module that only requires me to talk 10 minutes at the beginning of class, and then the rest of the class, they're doing something. And just knowing which ones of those to put at certain times of the year is really great and knowing which class is good at that. And if I'm having a bad day, to just know which class I can really just count on to do kind of work on their own, and which I can't.
Right. No, it's an excellent point, Lee. It's an excellent point that yes, there are some classes who can smell weakness and you don't want to give them the satisfaction. So you have to kind of tailor that response based on what you're doing to this class. And it's an excellent point, Lee, that it might be the opposite. It might be, I'm not going to count on you guys to play nice. So I'm going to double down on work that you need to do. So you're going to sit here quietly and fill out forms, or there will be hell to pay. Moving on, right? But whatever it takes to kind of set the stage for getting through the time and the process with the people in front of you, that's the plan that you need to make. That's an excellent point. As we wrap this up, I want to go to the idea of your mental health. And one of the reasons we're talking about this, one of the main reasons we're talking about this, is because it's important for your mental health. Crises will happen. Your life will take turns. Things will go on that you cannot control, or things will go on that you're excited about, but are not the normal structures to deal with. So when you don't have good plans in place, when you haven't thought through the process of how you're going to deal with these things if and when they occur, that's when you get thrown for a loop. So in trying to protect our mental health, Claire, let me ask you, what are some ways that we can try to prepare ourselves mentally, emotionally for these kinds of things before they happen? And then what can we do to help maintain that kind of calmness, hopefully, in the midst of the crisis?
Well, the first thing is, I think, not jumping around trying to figure out what is going to happen. So, a friend of mine always talks about it's like trying to buy a parachute, but you haven't bought the airplane ticket yet. And so, like, the event hasn't happened yet. So, instead of worrying about things that have not happened yet, be aware of what is happening and just focusing on that, not trying to think about what the next steps are necessarily going to be down the road. Having said that, there's a couple of things that I think hopefully we're doing in our day-to-day life, and I'm not trying to like pressure anybody into this, but really taking care of your mental health when you are well. So having some kind of a wellness practice is important. And I'm not saying like, oh, I'm gonna paint my nails every Saturday, or like I mean actually like thinking about what is it that you need to make your soul happy. And maybe it is painting nails, and that's okay too. But the other thing is also being aware that when things are happening to you and you're under stress, you might have to rethink your wellness plan. So, for example, I know I love meditation when everything's happy and fun, but when I'm either emotionally challenged or I'm going to say intellectually challenged, but usually the two are kind of overlapping with each other. Meditation does not work for me. And if I sit there and I'm like, I'm going to meditate because I have to, that's not going to help at all. But I find journaling really does work during those times. So kind of knowing what's going to work for you. I think also kind of having your stress package ready. So thinking about like, what are the things that I need to be aware of? So maybe it is, and I'm not, again, not pushing anything, but like maybe it is having access to melatonin so you can get a couple of nights good sleep, or maybe it is making sure that you can be in a space that's calm. Maybe it's listening to something that really does help you to focus and breathe and all of those things. Having said all of that, really just being aware of how you're feeling, and you need to address how that is, because emotions are kind of like UPS. They'll just keep coming back and coming back and coming back until they're dealt with, right? So you have to figure out how to deal with the emotions.
Excellent stuff. Lee, how about you? What are some of those strategies? What are some of the mental health things that'll help us keep our center and keep ourselves moving forward until the crisis abates?
I have gotten really so much better about setting boundaries. I do no schoolwork at all on Saturdays and Sundays. And unless, if it's pre-show and I've got to go do a costume, but I set boundaries, but then I'm not like totally rigid about them, because that gets really bad too. I cannot work today. Whether, okay, 15 minutes, let me get on and do this one thing for districts. And then it's done. So trying to really have practices like that, not instead of boundaries, but habits for that. Go to bed. Listen, the fact that this was after our time change, and I was like, realized that I had to be up the day after time change. I was like, oh my gosh, why did I sign up for this? Because I don't know why in the States we're still changing time, but that's not for me to know. But really get in bed by a certain time every night. I really try and get my sleep. I'm going to be super controversial here. Do less. do less. Do less rehearsal. It's never going to be perfect.
Mm-hmm.
It isn't. It's not going to be perfect. Do what you can do. Do what realistically. I always think, I tell my principal, I'm at my plimsoll line, like that line on a boat. Like I schedule my year at that line, and anything else that I add in once school starts, it's over the line. So I really don't add during the school year. I make out my schedule, and then because I get emails all the time, could you come and do this? Hey, what about this? Oh, this would be great. That would be great. But do less. Really try to do what is, because when I am stressed out and horrible teacher and all this stuff, I'm like, my first priority is those kids in front of me in the classroom. And so I want to be at my best as much as I can be for them. It doesn't mean that every day I'm at my best. It just means every day other than Monday. But yeah, really try and do what you can do so that you are at your best for your job and your life also, and not having to every day y'all just have a study day because I've got to do this, because I would feel terrible doing that.
Right.
I would feel bad doing that. But
Yeah.
really try and see, what can you say? No is a complete sentence that I hardly ever say, but it is a complete sentence. And I love, Claire, how you said it before, like, that's just not going to work into my schedule right now. I cannot add that right now. It sounds like a great idea. Oh my gosh, that does sound amazing. I wish I could, but I just can't right now.
Yeah, this is one of those airplane moments where you put the mask on yourself first before you help the people around you. If you aren't in control or taking care of your own health, physical and mental, then it is simply a matter of time before you are out of the game completely in trying to help your students, help your family. That you have a limited supply, and if you burn through it trying to help everyone else at the expense of yourself, then it's game over. Then you cannot help everyone because you are the one who will need the most help. So give yourself, as we say, grace and space. Give yourself the opportunity for your shows not to be perfect, for your life not to be perfect, because no matter what social media says, nobody's life is perfect. So embrace it, face it, communicate about it, and take the steps you need to keep the crisis under control until such time as it passes. And ultimately, it will pass. Lindsay, are there any thoughts or questions from the chat?
Nope. There was some chatting going on this topic. People in their own personal navigating to their personal struggles. So we will wrap things up right here. Thank you very much for joining us at our PLC. The certificate of attendance is just for our DTA members. So you should join the DTA. If you're not a member, why aren't you a member? And I must give a huge thank you to Lee and to Matt and to Claire. I just love listening to you talk about this. Makes me feel that there's hope there. That I love that. I love that it's such an important thing, and so everybody should go do it, right? Just like that. Just go take care of your navigating your personal struggles. All right. So thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you to our wonderful panel, and I hope you all have a great night. Okay. Bye, everyone.